They argued that, Rahimi argued that, and the court sided with him, which is why now it's going to the Supreme Court.
He was shooting guns in public. He was doing that while there were children right there on the street with him. He was shooting off guns.
Has just upheld a federal law that prevents accused domestic abusers from possessing firearms in an 8-1 vote.
The vehicle to the point where her head hit the dashboard, and when someone in that parking lot saw what happened, he started shooting.
This is ruled 8-1 in favor of a 1994 ban on firearms for people under restraining orders.
Interpret all the laws the way that the Supreme Court says they're to be interpreted. And when the Supreme Court speaks on something...
Domestic crime arm ban. The U.S. Supreme Court has upheld a federal statute prohibiting individuals subject to domestic violence protective orders from possessing arms in United States v. Rahimi, an 8-1 decision. This decision has significant implications for arms safety regulations and the protection of domestic crime survivors who are at greater risk of injury and demise from armed ABs. The case centered around Zaki Rahimi, who was indicted for possessing an arm while under a DVPO in 2019. In 2019, Rahimi AB'd his girlfriend and the mother of his child, identified as CM in court documents, in a parking lot in Arlington, Texas. CM sought a DVPO, recounting the assault in the parking lot as well as other attacks and threats. The court, with the consent of Rahimi and CM, entered a DVPO against Rahimi, finding that he was a credible threat to the physical safety of CM and their child. Rahimi was found in possession of arms, which is in violation of federal law, and indicted. Rahimi challenged the indictment, arguing that the prohibition violated his Second Amendment rights. The district court denied his motion, but following the Supreme Court's decision in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association Inc. v. Bruin, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals reversed the district court's ruling.
Has just upheld a federal law that prevents accused domestic abusers from possessing firearms in an 8-1 vote.
He was told that he was no longer allowed to have those weapons because of a domestic violence issue. He had a court system, he was indicted, charged, and convicted, and then this case has now ended up at the U.S. Supreme Court. That law was unconstitutional because he had the right to bear arms. The vehicle to the point where her head hit the dashboard, and when someone in that parking lot saw what happened, he started shooting. Those were the words that were used in the court documents. And he went to the person's home with an AR-15 and started shooting.
In Bruin, the Supreme Court articulated a new test for evaluating Second Amendment cases, which requires the government to show that the modern law is sufficiently analogous to historical arms laws. The Fifth Circuit, through a stringent application of Bruin, held that the federal law under which Rahimi had been indicted violated the Second Amendment because the court could discern no analogous historical tradition to support its constitutionality. The court's decision re-emphasized that the Second Amendment is not unlimited and identified a historical principle that individuals posing a threat can be disarmed consistent with the Second Amendment. The ruling also clarified that modern regulations need not be identical to historical laws, but should be relevantly similar in purpose and application. Justice Clarence Thomas, who authored the court's Bruin opinion, rejected the majority's assertion that the country has a historical tradition of disarming dangerous individuals. His lone dissent highlighted the divergence over the application of Bruin's history-focused test that he helped create. The majority decision in Rahimi marks the beginning, not the end, of managing the damage to constitutional law and public safety wrought by Bruin. In the wake of the Rahimi decision, the Justice Department has requested additional clarity from the court in 5 other pending Second Amendment cases. Recent Supreme Court decision. The issue of New York's concealed carry ban has once again resurfaced as a central focus in judicial review. Recently, the Supreme Court issued an 8-1 decision in the Rahimi case and subsequently remanded New York's concealed carry ban back to a lower court for reconsideration in light of Rahimi. Previously, the Supreme Court granted, vacated, and remanded the Antonyuk case, directing the Second Circuit Court to issue a new decision in alignment with the Rahimi ruling. Despite this guidance, the Second Circuit ultimately reaffirmed its original position on New York's concealed carry regulations. It concluded that the Rahimi decision did not materially alter the framework of its analysis. Legal experts anticipated that the Second Circuit would likely maintain its original stance, as the Rahimi case, though influential, did not seem relevant enough to mandate a different outcome in New York's concealed carry case. However, The Supreme Court's decision to remand the Antonyuk case has effectively prepared this issue for another potential appearance before the High Court.
Upheld a federal gun control law that is intended to protect victims of domestic violence. This is ruled 8-1 in favor of a 1994 ban on firearms for people under restraining orders. So the justices reversed a ruling from an appeals court in New Orleans that had struck down the law.
The court asks if the government can prohibit people under domestic violence restraining orders from possessing guns.
8 of the justices on board with a decision that limits the reach
Involving the Second Amendment and a gun control law created to keep firearms out of the hands of domestic abusers.
There's a clear threat of physical violence to another. The threatening individual may be disarmed.
This ongoing litigation is significant, especially since New York's concealed carry restrictions have been at the heart of legal battles since the Bruen decision. That ruling overturned New York's May issue concealed carry permitting scheme, but the state responded by passing a new law within days of the decision, effectively reinstating stricter control measures. The revised law faced multiple legal challenges, with several cases resulting in preliminary injunctions that temporarily halted parts of New York's Concealed Carry Improvement Act. However, the state of New York appealed to the Second Circuit, which then issued blanket stays on these preliminary injunctions. This led organizations such as Gun Owners of America to file emergency applications with the Supreme Court, seeking immediate intervention. The Supreme Court declined these emergency requests, but included a warning to the Second Circuit, urging expediency in addressing these cases. Consequently, the Second Circuit expedited hearings on 5 consolidated CCIA cases, leading to a comprehensive ruling on various aspects of the CCIA, including sensitive location restrictions like places of worship and broader limitations on public carry. Impact of Rahimi. The Second Circuit's latest decision reaffirms its initial position, finding that the Bruen decision does not invalidate New York's CCIA. According to the court, Bruen was exceptional and did not necessitate overturning the state's regulatory framework. By vacating parts of the district court's injunctions, the Second Circuit upheld most of the CCIA's restrictions, deeming them constitutionally sound under both the Second Amendment and Bruen. In response, Gun Owners of America filed a second petition for emergency Supreme Court intervention. Although the Antonyuk case remains in an interlocutory stage, the Supreme Court remanded it to the Second Circuit for reconsideration, specifically in light of Rahimi. The Rahimi decision presented an analysis of federal arms restrictions concerning domestic violence restraining orders. In an 8-1 decision, the Supreme Court upheld these restrictions, noting historical precedents for such regulations. However, the decision appeared largely unrelated to the central issues in Antonyuk, as New York's restrictions involve facial challenges and broader licensing regimes. In its recent ruling, the Second Circuit reiterated that Rahimi does not significantly impact its reasoning or conclusions in Antonyuk, stating, "Rahimi involved a regulation of arms that is quite different from any of those at issue in the present case, and thus has little direct bearing on our conclusion."
Just last year, when the Supreme Court changed the way that Second Amendment cases are analyzed.
They argued that, Rahimi argued that, and the court sided with him, which is why now it's going to the Supreme Court.
He was shooting guns in public. He was doing that while there were children right there on the street with him. He was shooting off guns.
The court further noted that Rahimi did not address criminal prohibitions for specific classes of individuals or licensing regimes that restrict arm possession in sensitive areas. One notable aspect of the Second Circuit's ruling is its explicit disagreement with a recent Ninth Circuit decision on a similar case in Wolford versus Hawaii. In that case, the Ninth Circuit upheld Hawaii's public carry restrictions, reasoning that individuals were notified of permissible areas for concealed carry through posted signs or verbal consent from property owners. In contrast, the Second Circuit argued that outright carry bans, even with such notice mechanisms, contradict the Second Amendment, as there is no historical precedent supporting such blanket restrictions. This distinction creates a notable circuit split between two left-leaning appellate courts and may push the Supreme Court to intervene and provide clarity. Path to the Supreme Court. With the Second Circuit reasserting its initial stance on New York's CCIA, it is likely that this issue will once again be presented before the Supreme Court. The Second Circuit's decision affirms its previous conclusions and appears to anticipate a direct Supreme Court review. Although this case remains in the interlocutory phase, GOA and the plaintiffs in Antonyuk could potentially pursue further litigation in the district court for a final merits decision. However, given the existence of similar rulings in the Second Circuit on related matters, a direct appeal to the Supreme Court seems increasingly probable. The Bruen decision initially appeared to set a significant precedent for Second Amendment protections by overturning New York's May issue licensing scheme. Despite this, New York's subsequent legal maneuvering has kept the state's restrictive CCIA framework intact, highlighting the ongoing complexity of Second Amendment jurisprudence in post-Bruen litigation. The Supreme Court's recent Rahimi decision and the Second Circuit's subsequent ruling indicate a cautious approach to reshaping state-level arm regulations, particularly in regions with historically restrictive laws like New York and California.
Your priority is disarming a law-abiding citizen, but not going after the violent criminal.
Interpret all the laws the way that the Supreme Court says they're to be interpreted. And when the Supreme Court speaks on something, Congress has explicitly forbidden ATF from keeping a registry, and we do not. Again.
In conclusion, the persistence of New York's concealed carry litigation underscores the ongoing national debate over arm control and Second Amendment rights. The Second Circuit's reaffirmation of the CCIA, despite the Rahimi ruling, reflects the complexity of aligning state regulations with Supreme Court precedent. Given the current circuit split between the Ninth and Second Circuits, the Supreme Court may soon be compelled to revisit the issue, potentially providing further clarification on the constitutionality of concealed carry restrictions across various states. Until then, New York's concealed carry regulations remain in a state of flux, subject to additional judicial scrutiny and potential legislative adjustments. That's all for this video, folks. We'll see you next time.